welcome to the July 10th, 2023 City Council Work Session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And with that, I thank you all for joining us, and I will call this meeting to order, and I will turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think we'll have the city recorder just kind of set the context for your conversation, and then it's really your conversation to have. With that, I'll turn it over to the city.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for this slide to come up. So this is a follow-up to council's presentation on the referendum petition 2023-1. To help orient you in your discussion, I have a timeline for you to start off. So the petition was certified on March 16th by me. And then per code requirements, city manager presented council options to you on April 5th, which was 20 days after the certification. We are currently in the middle slot, so this is the 10th, and it's just a follow-up to your previous discussion to give you the opportunity to continue. At the last meeting, you did have some questions around other deadlines, so the dates after are really just to help answer those questions for you. Again, we had a question about deadlines for the alternative measure. So if council chooses to submit an alternative measure to the November ballot, that would be need to be referred by August 9th. And then there was also a question about repealing the ordinance. And so if council does not wish the ordinance to appear on the November ballot, that would have to be done by September 7th. Just a reminder of what we covered on the 5th, your code outlines a couple of options once a referendum petition has gathered enough signatures to be put to the ballot. The first one is you do have the option to repeal the ordinance referred by the referendum petition, in which case it would not show up on the November ballot. The second option is you can vote to either urge adoption or defeat of the referred measure. And this is really just a statement to the electorate about the way that you would like the election to go. And then the last one is you can order a submission of an alternative measure to be voted on at the same election as the referred measure. And we do have possible motions outlined for you in your AIS, and this is just kind of repeating that. So apart from the three options outlined by code, you also have the first option, which is to take no action. And then as we discussed on April 5th, the referred measure will appear on the ballot in November. If council wishes to repeal the ordinance, we do have language in the second motion for you to be able to accomplish that. The third is related to urging the electorate to either adopt or defeat the referred measure. And the fourth would start the process for an alternative measure to be put on the ballot in November. And that's all I have for you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I have Emily in the queue. I am just going to say I want to make sure that this is a very tight timeline. I am going to hold you all to 1 minute rounds all the way through, and just to make sure that we get to the second item on the agenda today, which is the Revenue Committee, because that's been postponed a number of times. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. It pains me to do this, but since I'm the one who brought forth the original motion, I feel it needs to be me who makes it. I think it's time to take a pause. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy, and to come back after community communication, conversation, and see what the other cities, we sparked something, and other cities are now doing this. So we can be proud of that, even this, our moment to go forward. It will allow staff to work on electrification issues, and that's really important. We're can't do that right now. And so I move to repeal ordinance 20681 entitled An Ordinance Prohibiting Fossil Fuel Infrastructure in New Low-Rise Residential Buildings and adding sections 6.695 and 6.696 to the Eugene Code 1971.
Second.
Okay, thank you. I have Mike and then Randy in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor. I asked for the initial work session for us to discuss the idea of referring this question to the ballot in the first place. I'm reluctant to pull it off because of the incredibly strong reaction that the community had to our, in my opinion, bad decision to just push forward with this without their consent. I don't remember a ballot measure that's been certified as quickly and has gotten twice the number of ballot signatures within that short a period of time. I'm reluctant to vote in favor of pulling it off, even though it would save a great deal of time and effort. But I think the voters earned the right to have their say on this. And I think they're pretty frustrated and angry with us. I think that my colleagues feel that and sense that, and that's why they want to pull it off. I will probably vote in favor because of those supporting the idea.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, all right. I have Randy, then Jennifer, then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. I am glad that we're talking about repealing this. I'm glad that there is a motion to be made. I think there's other things we can do that will actually bear more fruit and create less controversy in our community. We need to pull people together and we need to move forward as unified as we can be if we're going to address climate change and protect our environment. Also, I just want to point out that originally I raised some objections to this particular motion because of the wording after the semicolon, and that is, and adding section 6.695 and 6.96 to the Eugene Code 1971. I felt that that was confusing the issue, but then it was subsequently pointed out to me that's the name of the ordinance. So we need to have the full thing on there. So I'm supporting that. And I agree with a lot of what Councillor Clark said, but I'll be voting in support of repeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, then Matt, then Greg, then Alan.
Thanks, Mayor. First, I want to thank Emily for bringing this forward. I know it probably wasn't easy. It doesn't feel good to be withdrawing this electrification ordinance, and I know there's a lot of people in our community who share that sentiment. But considering the recent Ninth Court decision, I think it's the right thing to do at this time. I want to make it clear that improving the health and safety of our community is of the utmost importance to me and many of my colleagues, and that phasing out fossil fuels is a very important part of that effort. The Ninth Court got it wrong, and I'm very thankful that there is appeal going through, and we will be following that process very closely here. And I look forward to what we can do in the meantime to make progress. There's lots of other things that we can do. But that doesn't mean that this is the end of this road as well. So thanks.
Thank you. Matt, and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. Similarly, I want to thank Councillor Semple for the thoughtful approach. But I also want to make it really clear that the pro-fossil fuel propaganda campaign that had been launched targeting children, litigating against statewide policy, and spending more than $1 million largely with a whole host of misinformation campaign. It's clear to me that the fossil fuel industry, the Northwest Natural in particular, will stop at nothing to keep polluting with fossil fuels. So I come at this from a vantage point wherein it's clear to me as elected officials, we have a responsibility to protect our residents from the worst impacts of the climate crisis, and to continue to lead in a transition to clean, renewable electricity. We must show the fossil fuel industry that we will not be cowed out of taking necessary steps to build a more sustainable, equitable, fossil-free future. I support this, Emily, and I look forward to next steps.
Thank you. Greg, and then Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. originally, I voted no on this because I don't think that we had the proper discussion on the electrification motion. I think that there are other ways that we can get to where we want to go, and we need to move in that direction. I'm looking forward to having a conversation about how we incentivize change in our community, how we encourage residents, businesses, and other entities in our community to move towards a fossil fuel free environment. But we have to do it in a way that is going to bring along possibly not everyone, but the majority of our community in a collective effort to make this change. And so I'm going to look forward to that discussion after we have this particular vote in a future work session.
Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, we absolutely do need to stop burning fossil fuels, and we need to decarbonize. There are 4 pillars to decarbonization: energy efficiency, cleaning up the electric grid, electrifying end uses, and developing low carbon fuel for those end uses that can't get electrified. So I think at this point, it's appropriate to repeal this. We're going to be caught up in the courts for potentially years. It's disallowed staff from working on climate work because of the ballot measure. And actually, I worked to prevent this exact thing from happening for a very long time. And it was absolutely foreseeable and actually warned that a divisive battle would be bad. And with this repeal, I think we can avoid that and put our community through that when it wouldn't do a lot in the first place. We still haven't had a single metric ton or even a pound of greenhouse gas emissions reduced because of this tactic. So I think it's time to move on and actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. Lindsay, Lindsay is in transit. I don't know if Lindsay, you want to speak?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Do you want to turn?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, again, not super happy about this vote, but I am happy to, continue this conversation and recommit ourselves to doing real substantial climate work in our community. I think it's time that we reanalyze, re-strategize, and work really closely with our whole community to be able to engage, work with our business community, be able to come up with some innovative solutions together. So with the legal landscape that we have in front of us, I think it just makes sense. So I will be supporting the repeal, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, I think we're ready for a vote. So all in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That passes unanimously. And I want to thank Emily for bringing this up, and I want to thank council for taking this action. I believe that when you pass this ordinance, you were doing the right thing. We do have an obligation to stem the flow of fossil fuels in our community. Buildings contribute to fossil fuels. But I also believe when you're faced with a brick wall, and this legal challenge faces us with a brick wall, you have to find other pathways to do the work. And we have established policy, and we have the capacity to follow those pathways, and even more so with federal and state investments that are coming our way. So it is now the right time to pivot to the work that we can do before us and see how the legal landscape plays out later. So thank you for that vote. And I am looking because I had Lindsay, did you have something you wanted to bring again to the table?
Yes, I do. And I'm sorry for the background noise here. I wanted to just let us take a bit of time in the future to look at other ways that we could potentially get similar results from this ordinance. So I do have a motion prepared if I am ready, if I'm okay to do so.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Move to direct the city manager to return to council before July 2024 for a discussion regarding ways in which the city can reduce the use of fossil fuels in new construction, including the feasibility of fossil fuel reduction strategies that have been adopted in other jurisdictions.
Second.
Okay, I'm opening the floor for discussion. I have,
See that on the screen or?
Yeah, because
That was a lot.
okay, you want to,
I wasn't given that. I don't have
Oh,
a motion.
okay. Lindsay, can you
I
put that
can,
in?
I can text it to Katie right now if that helps.
Okay, good. That would be great.
Well, yeah, email would be better, but I can try.
Would you just read it while she's doing that? Lindsay, could you read it one more time, please? Slowly.
Okay.
Yes. Move to direct the city manager to return to council before July 2024 for discussion regarding ways in which the city can reduce the use of fossil fuels in new construction, including the feasibility of fossil fuel reduction strategies that have been adopted in other jurisdictions.
Okay, and while we're getting that up on the screen, I can open the queue. So, Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Mine is, I think, a pretty simple yes or no question. To the maker of the motion, if she's willing. Does this include bringing the ban back?
I think over the past several months, I've been made aware of, there's 100 other cities doing this in 100 different ways. The Ninth Circuit Court case is telling us we can't do this in this kind of way right at this moment. But it doesn't have to look like the ban. I think we can use more incentives, use more, collaboration with the community. I really just want to bring this particular conversation back to the table because new construction is still going to be, a big chunk of our fossil fuel use in the future.
Sure. And I'd like to say that when Greg first brought up the idea of incentives, I was entirely for it. And Randy has mentioned this and spoken to it many times. And I was in favor of that discussion. But when the council turned to a more heavy-handed approach, I think that was a mistake, always have. And in this particular case, I'm asking for a definitive yes or no because my vote is contingent on that. I don't want to take the heavy-handed approach again. And if this is just setting the stage to bring up the ban again after the Ninth Circuit gets done at some point, if in fact they back off their decision, I don't want to do that. So does the ban on future construction constitute an acceptable thing for the manager to bring back?
Asking me to bring back
Yeah.
a discussion.
Right. Yeah.
And where you go with that, I think is.
Right.
Yeah.
I think if I could chime in, Mike, I would, it is to bring back a discussion because the landscape is changing. So it's not only the legal situation with the Ninth Circuit Court, but opportunities that are opened through the state of other ways of doing that.
Mayor, I appreciated your voice on this, talking about other ways that were not bans and so heavy-handed. And I'm willing to have those discussions. I'd love to have. But I'm not willing for us to go down the same road again later. And it seems like that's what we're doing.
You're over time, Mike. I'm sorry. So
no direct answer, yes or no?
Maybe.
we're bringing back a discussion in which I'm understanding.
Say anything.
Anybody can bring that.
Anybody can bring anything. We're coming back
Sure,
to
I
a
know that,
discussion.
of course, but I'm just
I'm
asking
not
the intent
constraining
of the
that.
motion.
So the motion is up in front of you. You can see what that motion is. And I have Randy in the queue. Anybody else?
Greg.
On this one? Greg, okay.
Thank you, Mayor. And I share some of the same concerns just expressed by Councilor Clark. I'm not, my sense is this is not a way to usurp the referendum petition process, but I would be very distressed if it were. I think that in good faith, we need to repeal this. But at the same time, there's other things we can do. And I also concur with Counselor Evans in looking at what we can do to incent change as opposed to a heavy-handed ban. And that's been my problem from day one with this, is that if we're going to go that route on something like this, it should be a vote of the people. So with that said, I'll be watching for that very closely, but at the same time, I want to be willing to talk about anything within reason. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greg and then Alan.
So I would like to offer a friendly amendment to this motion. And that would be to say, to ask the city manager to bring back a package of incentives for decarbonization. I would hope that the maker of the motion, Councilor Leach, would accept that. And if I could get a second, that we could discuss that as a more proactive way of approaching this issue.
Greg, Alan has
my motion.
a motion coming
Coming up.
next, which says just that.
Never mind.
You're Mr. Segue though.
Yeah.
Mr. Segue.
Yeah.
Mr.
well,
Segue,
then-
yes.
Then we'll.
Just remember
I
what you
hand it
said.
off to you.
Remember
Okay.
what you said when you come up with that.
All right. All right. So Alan, you have a minute.
Yeah. So one of the things that we need to do is focus on things that actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This tactic has not worked. It's not going to work. It's also insignificantly small. New construction in the residential in new construction emissions is 0.4% of the greenhouse gas emissions we need to reduce over the next 20 years. So if we're actually trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, this is not the place to focus. The existing use of greenhouse gases in our buildings, in our transportation system, emissions are where we should focus. So I'm willing to have a conversation, but this isn't the place to focus for real greenhouse gas emission reductions.
All right. Thank you. Matt?
Thanks, Mayor. I keep hearing the words heavy-handed batted around to describe an action that council appropriately took, and banning fossil fuel hookups in new low-rise residential homes that don't yet exist. It, from my vantage point, is far from heavy-handed, but it's imperative that A, the conversation come back, B, that we talk incentives. So I look forward to the upcoming motion, and C, that Eugene continues to lead in developing and passing new legally defensible ordinance language that requires fossil fuel residential construction to be all electric as soon as possible. And the way to get there is through this motion, which is broad, appropriately broad. And I thank you, Councilor Leach, for bringing it up. I look forward to the discussion within calendar year 2024.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm going to support Councilor Leach's motion. I like that it doesn't say just incentives. We're trying to change people's behaviors, right? And use a different fuel source. And you don't always have to pay someone to do that. Sometimes there are things that you can do that don't cost money to change behaviors. I don't want to take things off the table just because we're so fixated on one thing. I think one of the things that we benefit from in this, particularly on climate, is being flexible and open to different and new ways of doing things. All of this is about changing things on a systemic level. And when we take things off the table, we're just eliminating certain opportunities that we may not realize are out there. So I like the broadness of what Lindsay is saying, is just bring me back what's possible. Council will sift through it. We will decide what's appropriate.
Thank you for that. Well said. Okay, with that, I think we are ready for a vote on, oh, Mike, you still have your hand up again. Second round, Mike, go for it.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make with crystal clarity here that I'll vote against this motion, but in favor of what Alan, I haven't heard the motion yet, but likely to vote in favor of what Alan has planned. I agree entirely with what he said. And for me, this is about this issue getting back onto the table easily. It is extremely heavy-handed. And the way you know the community agrees that that's the fact is how quickly they got the signatures to repeal it. And it's the very reason we're taking it off the table right now. We know it'll fail in November. And so it's a save face attempt. I don't want to take the chance that those tactics will come back to the table, but I'd very much like to have every kind of conversation about incentives. And if the maker of the motion would have accepted Greg's friendly, and I didn't hear an answer on that question, I would have probably voted in favor of it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we are ready for a vote on, oh, Greg, one more comment?
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm going to support Alan's upcoming motion with the addition of us looking at our local code and fees and other devices that we can leverage decarbonization with and incentivize it. It says federal and state in your motion, Alan, but I think that we can do some things on the local level to, forgive some fees or to suspend some fees or do some other things of eliminating fees that may further encourage decarbonization in different ways and different modes. We have solar, we have wind, and now there's emerging technologies of wave technologies from the ocean that are now coming into place. So I don't want to take anything off the table.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I think we're ready for a vote. All in favor of the motion to come back with more information in by July 2024, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? 1. Okay, thank you very much. And I do want to say that I think I really appreciate particularly Jennifer's comments. I think all things are possible, and we were, I think, very much within our local authority to pass this ordinance the first time. And we're very much within our local authority to consider how we could reduce the use of fossil fuels in future construction. So I do look forward to all of the things that we will learn in the coming year and all of the engagement we will have in the community about the best paths, multiple paths forward. And with that, I will turn to Alan for his motion.
Sure. I think we find ourselves in an opportunity to refocus and reorient our climate actions and our climate action plan. And moving forward, I think we should strive to focus our near-term climate actions that align with existing new state and federal programs. Funding and incentive doesn't mean they're not local. It means that we align with them so we can do lots of things locally. And we should focus on areas that actually reduce significant amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and potential funding mechanisms that we can put in place to supplement that's happening at the federal and state level. And so we would develop those actions by engaging our community, in particular, historically disadvantaged, and our business community. And I'm taking into consideration the work that we've done with the Good Company. And then also, though we've been exclusively on decarbonizing buildings, we need to focus on transportation as well, which is the majority, 53% of our greenhouse gas.
I want the motion on the table. So
I move to direct the city manager to, as soon as possible after the summer break, to return with a work session to discuss how to proceed on near-term climate actions that aligns with new and existing federal and state programs, funding, and incentives that focus on strategic areas that reduce significant amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and includes community engagement.
Second.
great. Okay. Randy, did you want to speak?
I was just going to give my time to Alan.
Oh. He took it anyway.
He was on a roll.
All right, Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. Any idea as the parameters as soon as possible after summer break? I mean, it sounds like, oh, summer break, we're gonna have something on the table, but it could also be in 3 years.
No.
So
I think we're aiming for fall.
is that possible? Sustainability people, that's a quick turnaround.
Seeing Matt nodding.
There's a chair in the way. I can't see
And,
either. of
Somewhere
you.
between September and 3 years. Yes.
All right, okay. It's
That's sarcasm.
so we can. All right. I
Okay.
think
Right, good. Okay, Yeah, Jennifer.
I have a question. So who gets to decide what significant amounts means? Is that just up to staff to pick a?
Well,
I mean, giving assignments that are vague are sometimes hard. There's a lot of, I want to set staff up for success. So, and as soon as possible after summer break is not a lot of time. So I don't know, maybe we don't need to clarify and everyone is comfortable with significant amounts. So while you're pondering that, I'm going to move on to my other question.
Okay.
My other question is, we have done a lot of community engagement around our CAP. So I don't want to redo that again. I think that to a certain extent, that is a waste of our time. Unless we have some kind of very intentional engagement that we're going to do that we haven't done before. So I also am curious as to what does includes community engagement mean? Is that what we're doing before, as soon as possible after spring? You know, is that before that work? After?
I'm going to just jump in first and then manager and others may stay. I'll just say two things. In July 2022, you passed two motions related to community engagement. So there were very specific instructions from council to staff about what that community engagement should be. And you also passed a motion embedding your decarbonization goals within the Climate Action Plan 2.0. So again, you've already given staff very specific instructions. That was in July 2022.
So is this the same engagement or is
So
it?
this, I'm just saying, you can just move forward on policy you have already approved and set forward as your baseline here.
Okay. I just know that we're doing a lot of community engagement.
Right.
And if we're adding like another thing that seems somewhat
So
unsustainable.
perhaps Matt.
It's
And
fine. That's not the intent of this.
Okay.
The intent was to incorporate stuff that we've already said that they're already starting to do.
Embedded into the other
Right.
stuff.
Right, so we're engaging the business community, we're engaging public, and we're also incorporating into the
Okay.
into the climate action.
That makes perfect sense. I just wanted to make sure we weren't asking you
I
guys to do yet again another.
Right.
I didn't want to lose that element of what we already did.
Right.
There's some keywords in the motion that stand out to me around the work session is to discuss how to proceed on a whole bunch of stuff. So it's not actually directing that work just yet. That's how I'm reading that.
Correct.
Okay.
You want to speak to any of this?
Well, and I think maybe we can speak a little bit to the timeline and why we think that'll work. And that's that Ian and his team have already been doing a lot of work trying to understand the federal and state funding packages that are coming through and preparing when the opportunity presents itself to start that community outreach in the near term where we could integrate this in. So I don't think we are likely to have all the answers in the fall because some of the federal rules are still in process and where the money flows, whether it's the state or locals, is all still developing as a picture. But I think we'll be able to give you some significant, information for you to consider about where things are.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got 14 seconds. So significant amounts, I have concerns about those particular words because I'm worried things that might be good choices for our community and might fit really well into what a city does would be left out. I'd be a little more comfortable if that wasn't there or if it perhaps said collectively.
Jennifer,
Oh, am I
except
over?
You're way over.
Oh, I thought I had 14. I'm sorry.
Well, you had 14.
Oh, I talked up.
So, but I think the question is a good one. So I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in on what you might mean by that, Alan, or how Matt or Ian might interpret that word.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is when you do traditional planning, you look at a pie chart and you say, where are all the sources of greenhouse gas emissions coming from? The biggest one that stands out is transportation at 53%. And we're basically we don't have any conversations to the council about that. So focusing on that, focusing on buildings is the other big part of it. And so if the proposed motion were a tiny little sliver of this gigantic piece of pie, I think that in traditional planning, you wouldn't focus on that first.
Okay.
Because you wouldn't get your bang for the buck.
Matt, do you want to
Yeah, I could just
Yeah.
add, I mean, I think when we've been looking at this, because Ian has already started some mapping on this, we're looking at what the pots of federal funding are, how they overlap with the actions that are already in the cap. And what's, we know from that analysis, which ones would have the greatest effect on reducing emissions. So I think we can overlay that and bring that back to share.
Okay. Matt?
Well, all the tactics added up. If multiple municipalities are doing said tactics, it makes a splash. I'm concerned about the significant amounts piece because from what I hear, the very ban that we just repealed wouldn't have made it to the table because it's such an insignificant amount compared to some of the other strategies that we could that we could take on. So I want to give staff the flexibility regardless of how much impact a particular action has, and see and like others have expressed, see what's on the table entirely. As such, Mayor, I move to amend striking the words significant amounts of from the proposed motion, unless the maker would accept it as a friendly. No. Yeah.
Second.
Okay, anyone want to speak to this proposal to amend, remove those words? All in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, opposed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I think I am going to support, I'm going to support keeping it because I think the intent is to target what we're doing.
So you just need to make clear how you're voting on them.
So I'm voting yes to keep it.
So you're voting no on.
I'm voting no to the removal. I'm sorry. Thank you. Like no to remove, yes to keep it. All right. So now that's clear. We're back to the main motion. All in favor, please. Yeah. Oh, Alan, you have a comment.
Thank you. My intent with this motion is to align what we're doing with the significant stuff that's happening at the state and the federal level, because there's lots and lots going on. There are numerous programs, numerous regulations, and there are literally billions of dollars that we can access. I wrote a 4-page memo to folks outlining a pathway that listed all of the different programs and regulations that are already in existence that we can tap into or be in alignment with, including a lot of things on the transportation sector. And then just finally, one more point. When we asked Good Company to come back to us, one of the things that they said was be strategic and and they had many sound recommendations. Specifically, they suggested focusing on existing buildings. That's almost all of the greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. So, and that's the intent here, is to really focus in on stuff that actually can make a big difference.
Okay, Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. And I really appreciate what you're bringing forward here, Alan. I think this is strategic. I don't think our last effort was. I also would disagree that our public engagement, it may have been robust to some, but I can't believe how many people I ran into that didn't know anything about it. And we certainly caught people by surprise. And I'm hoping that we can find a public communication method that gets our word out. And I realize that's a challenge in today's environment, but we have got to find a better way of reaching the public. And we can't expect people to show up to an obscure sustainability commission meeting about the CAP 2.0, where the fossil fuel natural gas was in an appendix. I mean, we need to bright light anything we're doing on this, and we need to engage people. And what I like about Alan's plan that builds off of what Councillor Evans had talked about is that we're finding ways to bring people together. And that's what we need to do to move forward successfully.
Well done. Okay.
I had 1
You
second.
have one? Okay.
I had 1 second.
Oh, you have,
I'm just
I
saying,
am so
you know.
sorry. Did I deprive you of a second?
You're fine.
Okay.
You're fine.
You did good timing though.
No, we're all good. We are all
Yeah, got it. I got it. You get credit.
Apparently so.
1 second, 1 heart.
Right.
All right, we have a motion on the table. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that passes unanimously. That is excellent. Thank you all very, very much for that work and that conversation. I am very happy that we're going to move forward to talk about all of the other ways we can have an impact on our greenhouse gas emissions and reduce our fossil fuel use in this city. Thank you very much. Look forward to the next round. And also, we finished with like 4 minutes to spare. So well done.
Good job.
Well done, Mayor.
Yes, you ran it well. Need mom to hand on your gavel though.
It's a hot minute. It's good. I like it.
It's good. Forces it fast. Okay. All right. Thank you. So our second item, the several times deferred conversation about the financial condition and the revenue. So I'll turn it over to the manager.
1 second here.
Right before God.
I can go back to the.
Looks like the back of my TV.
There we go.
It's
Right, thank you. See, I forgot to change the date on the front. That's all right. So the last time that we were here talking about revenue, I was leading the conversation. I was here sort of as the partner, but I thought it would be good to come back today and try to unravel some of the complexity that we thought we were taking out of the last conversation, but apparently in our attempt to sort of clarify and simplify, it felt like it was getting more complex. And we heard those words that you never want to hear in this role, which is people were confused or caught off guard. And that was not the intent. And so tonight I'm hoping we can kind of simplify this a little bit and return to the same page. So we're not going to play Twister, but you see some of the slides that you saw the last time that are color coded. This next slide, what I'm going to try to do is start walking through all the different elements that have entered into our revenue conversation. This slide will go into a lot more detail on all these, but I'm just going to slide through the things that I think we've all been talking about. The first was, just a conversation around newer enhanced services. This is the conversation that started a long time ago with a work session about homelessness and climate. We then entered into kind of our budget gap situation during the biennium that we still had identified issues that are out there, like things that are funded with one-time dollars that are going to drop off. So we started talking about the things that we knew that were service gaps we'd have to find a revenue source for. And the budget committee started talking about putting together a committee for that. And then what happened during the biennium was we introduced the ongoing structural gap, which is no matter if you solve these top two things, we still have an issue with revenues being sort of flat and our costs going up in this continual cycle that we'll get into. All of that leads to a conversation around what is our right service level? Do we need to align our services differently? Do we need to adjust our services? That's a whole separate conversation, but one that feels front of mind for us, because that's without a new revenue, that's how we solve the issues. And then the other related and important conversations around how we grow our base and our discussion about a long-term financial plan, which is a longer-term tool, but necessary. So all of those things I'm going to go into a tiny bit more detail about. Oops, sorry, this thing is way slower than I am. Okay, so these are the things we talked about around sort of those new and enhanced services, which were housing and homelessness, climate. We've started talking about just recently, potentially a 17th station, potentially at the City Hall site. We've talked about the library, 4th floor expansion, and then the most recent that's kind of emerging is around Eugene Emeralds and what their stadium is. Again, this is sort of high level. You may be thinking of things that I have not included, and I want to hear about that. Some of the known gaps that we've talked about, funding for the Safe Sleep sites, the navigation center, we still don't have an ongoing funding source for. Our rest stops, the public spaces team, there's some of the positions that are only funded through the biennium but not ongoing. The Human Services Commission funding, the Animal Services funding, all of that's funded through the biennium but not ongoing. And then the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and capital funding that we have been doing through marginal beginning working capital, but we had sort of introduced as something we might want to talk about as part of our financial policies discussion. And then I put planning in here because we have what feels like a growing set of needs at the state level, requirements at the state level around planning, a huge local desire around more neighborhood planning, and yet the resources never line up for that. So I at least feel like I need to highlight it as a known service gap. The ongoing structural gap is a little bit different because we sort of know the number. We're understanding what that is, but the part that I think is giving us more of the anxiety is understanding what's really connected to that. And is there a revenue solution, or is it really more of a service alignment discussion, a budget adjustment? Under the adjust and align, I think, we're continuing to explore the role of PBB, which the priority-based budget, which I'm starting to think about how we talk about it differently. And I've been sort of talking about it more like a service alignment. What is that right mix of services in the right level? We have a lot of little small R revenue adjustments that are in place, and what level of community engagement as we continue to think about what needs to be adjusted. How do we want to involve people in that conversation other than you and the budget committee, if at all? The Eco-Devo conversation, I think, is really an important one. It's one that we'll continue to pick up. You'll see how this fits on the timeline. It's not just about the property tax growth. It's also, I think, about jobs and payroll. And then I've already sort of touched on this. So one of the things that we've been hearing pretty loud and clear. And so again, these slides are gonna kind of repeat themselves with a little bit more information every time. But I think of those first three, the new services, the known gap, and the ongoing structural gap, those are all things that are kind of in this. How does revenue fit into this? And it's been really clear that what City Council wants to come up with is kind of a list. Here are the things, the scope, the dollar amounts that you want us to focus on prior to my engaging anybody from the community into a kind of a revenue team, as you might call it, discussion. So that would lead to us doing some research, that revenue discussion, and then it comes back to you for a final decision on what things we might implement and what things we might not. And similar with the service adjustment alignment, we're already talking about that, absent any new revenues, how are we actually going to balance the budget? And we have to do that regardless. So similarly, the executive team will come up with a list, and then eventually council will need to approve that too. Similar with the others, some work sessions, some research. And finally, I think a list kind of like we did with the downtown Baker's Dozen around like, what are the things we actually want to tackle around economic growth and our long-term finances. What's interesting about all of these is you start to put them all together on a chart is on the left, it's kind of really clear what the program is. I mean, you can dial it up and back, like here's how much we want to do about housing and homelessness. Here's how much we might want to do around climate, but it's programmatically, it's pretty understandable. The ongoing structural gap, the number is actually pretty understandable, but the services and what is attached to that is less so. So I'm going to start shifting into a little bit of why we're feeling some anxiety and start to kind of plot out what we need tonight and what we need hopefully before you go on break. I've plotted this out in terms of all of these things are actually pretty urgent, but when you think about critical, like I was trying to come up with like, what are the right words to tell you the different timelines. So some of the things are absolutely like, we have to have a solution that we're putting into place sort of by the next fiscal year, because the second part of the biennium is going to have that gap that we have to solve for. Some of these things are urgent, which means by the time we come around to the next biennium, as we're building the next budget, we want to have kind of an idea of a solution. And some of them are really important, but they're not like, there's not a financial, like you got to do it by this date. They're important in terms of, are we going to be able to provide really excellent fire and EMS service without a station? So it's very important, but it's not driving that kind of timeline. As we start to look at some of the dollars, again, those first topics, we haven't really hit a number. Some of the others we actually know. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but we kind of have a general idea. And what we know you want is a program and a number, so you can decide which of these you'd like us to advance. The Emeralds is one that you're hearing a lot about, and we're trying to ascertain sort of like, what is the number? And that's the one that the project actually has about a $43 million project gap, of which they're hoping the city can contribute somewhere around $15 million. That one's like it's kind of interesting as you start to plot these out. This is very rough. You can pull any one of these numbers out and be like, actually, I think this one should be higher this way, but I did it just to illustrate. What you really want is that top right corner to be like, these are the things we want to focus on. But what's interesting is when you start to sort of plot these things out, a lot of the things that are known service gaps that are urgent and clear may not be actually the areas that you really want to focus. The M's is an interesting one sitting there at number 5. It's got a outline. You can't see the outline in this presentation, but mostly intended to be, this is not a city service, but it's something that is important. The piece that's concerning to me is that the gap, the structural gap, is actually really urgent, and it's really unclear what that is. And so that one's actually harder to solve when you start thinking about council saying we want to actually know what the scope and the number is. So it brings up a couple of questions as we start to work through this around, which one of these you're going to want to explore for revenue options, which ones you want to provide more clarity about, you want to dig into, and how much clarity we need on number 15 before you decide you're okay with some amount of discussion about revenue without it being really specific for what it is. So number 15, again, the structural gap, there's really 2 problems we're trying to solve. One of them is the sort of flat revenue growth with expenses that kind of go up, and then we have to make reductions to bring it down, and then it goes back up. And so we're trying to break that cycle of how do you actually have a broad enough portfolio that you can kind of level that red line. But in the meantime, we also have to solve for this problem, which is the second part of the biennium, and then going on, how do we actually create that budget reduction? So those are really the two things that are out there. As we start to think about time and process, we're here now. We'd hope to be here sooner. We keep, getting later in the year, which is concerning. But the idea was that we would have this conversation. You would be able to say, hey, of the red and yellow items, these are the things we really want you to explore. This is the amount. It'd be great to have something on the ongoing structural gap. Either you don't want to talk about that at all with the revenue committee, or you want to pick some number to think about. Then we will go, after you go on break, we're already working on this, but we'll work even more diligently on doing the research around what are all the other options around the state, what are other cities doing. We're doing some work on how would we align services and adjust services. I'll engage a revenue committee, similar to what happened with the community safety initiative. It was a city managers committee. Council never actually even voted on it. You just were informed, hey, we're doing this. And we did that and brought back recommendations from the city manager. That would allow you, as you come back into the fall, to say yes to a few things that we could implement by the time we get into the second year of the biennium. And then more importantly, as we get into the next biennium, because things take a little bit of time. And I have some concern that we won't be able to implement things fast enough without at least pausing some services. All along the way you're doing this, we're having the same conversations. We're starting to think about what's the backup plan, because eventually you'll need to make some decisions about that. Importantly and related is the work around growing our base, because we've heard really clearly, we don't want to just talk about raising revenue. We actually want to talk about how we raise that in more, community-minded ways by being really intentional about our property growth and job growth. So here's some things in terms of questions. Going into that, what we've heard, and we can hear more, is that you really don't want us talking with a revenue committee without some kind of sideboards, which is what we're hoping to get. And I think the part that is, I know I'm being really repetitive, but the structural gap is actually the really difficult one to put sideboards on, because what we would need is time to say, well, here's where we would find $8 more million. And then you would say, well, let's talk about revenue for that. But the time is just not going to allow for that to happen in the same way. So that's why we're trying to figure out how do we move some of this faster while still being very respectful of the role you want to play and the role that is yours as city council. So with that, I think that's the end of my presentation, and we're just open for your thoughts on this and how you do or don't support that approach.
Okay, thank you very much. You see Greg already ready to make a comment, so I'll turn it over to you, Greg, and then Mike.
So, can you go over what the discussion has been around how we can increase our industrial manufacturing capacity so that we can increase our tax base? I know that we have a whole initiative going around the Clear Lake area and, getting that infrastructure in so that we can do, but I know that that's going to be long range, 10, 15, 20 years before we can actually, get that in place so that we can locate businesses and jobs and create those revenue streams. But what other things are we looking at in terms of building manufacturing, industrial capacity, and other capacities so that we can create, more jobs, more revenue in those terms?
I'll point to a couple of things. So you hit the big one, which is making sure we have enough land and then get that land served. But you're right. So you spoke to the Clear Lake piece and the work we've done with the legislature. We weren't successful in getting those funds yet. I'm going to say yet because that's a good word.
Limbo.
Yet is hopeful, and I like that.
Limbo.
A couple other things that are in process. The Mayor's Blue Ribbon Committee around economic development has brought in, I think, some good folks. I know you're going to kick that off soon. That will help us identify where should we be targeting outside of that new land, right? That's one piece. The other piece is we've reconvened a regional conversation with Springfield, Lane County, Eugene, and both chambers around kind of our regional economic development as we move forward and what are some of our strategies. I think our next one of those is this week, which is also helping to start frame like what is it we actually need to do exactly what you're doing. So in terms of the city right now, is there anybody that's turning one of those dials? We're still in kind of a planning stage. So unless somebody else has specifics, I think that's where we're at. A lot of concerted effort around moving that forward, but it's not implemented yet. Sort of kind of like, I guess I would say in all things you kind of plan and implement. So we did a lot of work around planning for that industrial land, getting the UGB expanded. We implemented that. And now it's like, okay, now we have to get it served. And then I think the rest will follow. And so that's actually, we're spending a lot of time and energy to get that served.
Okay, thank you. I have Mike and then Alan, and I just did some last minute adjusting. So we're doing 2-minute rounds just to make sure we can keep moving through this. So sorry.
And I'll take a 2-minute round too.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you. It's been a lot of years that every time we talk about revenue at this table, I bring up the idea of growing the base. And I've never actually seen it in a presentation as a part of the actually, understood planning till just now today. So thank you very much for that. I think that's very wise. I'd like to see us focusing more time on that over time than just this once, but I'm glad we're finally adding that to the mix. All of the pieces that you listed that we might spend other revenues on, I'm kind of channeling Chris Pryor here. I think all of those, maybe except one, were ongoing revenue needs. There is at least one that is a one-time revenue need. And what I didn't see in any of the listings around revenue options were one-time revenue options that might serve a one-time revenue need. So I would like to add to that list and say, I do believe, based on what I know, we have underutilized city assets that might be of help with regard to one-time needs, especially around helping the Emeralds with a new stadium. If that were possible, I think there are some assets that the city has that are not just underutilized, but frankly, inappropriately valued compared to the community value of helping see that new stadium come to pass. So I'm hoping we're willing to look at sale of assets as an additional revenue source, just specifically for one-time expenditures. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
Yeah, as part of this discussion and what we look for, I think, as you said, Sarah, there's always the aspect of doing things smarter and doing it at less cost. So finding savings and efficiencies is always something that's on the table. And that's definitely part of this process, but also growing our base, which is very important, and it's continual. But as Greg noted, it takes a long time. I mean, to get $1 million, you need what? 4 Billy River centers to show up like that. So it just takes a while. One of the questions I had about the way you structured this, Sarah, slide 8, which had the red and yellow and blue items, number 1, housing and homelessness. To me, that is safe sleep sites, number 6, rest stops, number 7, navigation center, number 8, human services funding, number 10, and affordable housing trust fund, 13. They're all in one, to me. So it's just more specificity. And then similarly, 3, 14, and 4, the fire station, the 4th floor, and the facilities funding, they're all about facilities. So, that I think this is just a little bit more detail than the first 2 anyway. But I'm actually unclear about what you're asking of the council right now and what the next steps are.
So I think, what we've been asking for is some understanding of these areas. Which ones are you most interested in seeking new revenue for? So for the reason why the housing and homelessness sits up by itself is that was, even with all these other things that we were doing down below, at one point, that was still a desire. And now I think that question is a little bit different. I've heard people saying, is that really our role? Is that not our role? So really under all of those, which of these are you most interested in the city finding a solution for, or studying around revenue that you may eventually say, we actually don't want to take that on. We actually don't think that's the city's role, but we would like to explore what revenue sources are possible. So I think knowing which ones are most interesting to you. And I think what we had talked about the last time was, that's what we heard, that you wanted to be able to say, we want to find funding for these things at this amount. The structural gap is the one that's more complicated, because we would like the ability to, and we'll do it if there's not a revenue team at all, like what are the possibilities here? If we needed to stabilize our revenue source for multiple services, how would we do that? If it's not property taxes, how would you do that? And what we were proposing at the time is we should pull the revenue group together and have them start learning and studying that. But I think it felt like we were going backwards to the first work session. And so that's why I'm showing it as an intertwined thing. So I think the piece of it is, which of these do you have the most interest in us exploring, and at what amount? And on the gap, do you want us to bring back revenue solutions on that? Do you want us to say, okay, let's ask the revenue team to look at finding, $4 million, or Sarah, city manager, you need to find $8 million of reduction in services. The reason why I'm a little hesitant on that is we'll be back here in a couple of years with the same concern if we don't have a different structural piece. So I think it's really, what does the council need from us?
Wasn't exactly prepared to come and say, here's what we want.
Yeah.
But when I did the
You don't have to do it today, but we were just
like,
trying to present the issues.
Right. When I was doing the original work session, was prompted a lot of this. It was about housing and homelessness and climate. And a lot of the stuff's embedded in that. Some more emerging issues have come up around the structural deficit of 8.3 million, and the fire station and library 4th floor. And then M's, I think, is a whole different kettle of fish. So,
Ellen, I'll give you a second round.
yeah.
Okay. Matt.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, on that same slide, if we could put it back up, please. The yellow, the new or the known service gaps, Sarah, are those in any particular order? Because I see they range in the ongoing target estimates. Are those just as they came to mind?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much.
Okay. Well, since this council, that gives me less heartburn because I see animal services kind of plugged in the middle of the pack. But this council overwhelmingly supported the strategic effort to secure their funding for the biennium. So I would certainly indicate that's indicative to me that would be the important column. Frankly, a great many of these, if not all of these, are in that important column. Could you elaborate on the thought process behind the important column and why some got it, some didn't?
Well, they're all important at the very least. Some of them are, it's the timeline. So if you look at the top where it says 7/24,
yeah,
that means that we need a solution by the time we come into July of next year. That's what it means. And the other one means we need a solution by the time we come into the next biennium. So I was just trying to do it in terms of like, this is what's right here front and center for us. Not that any of them are more or less important than the others.
Okay.
The timeline importance.
Well, for my packet, then I'm going to mark them all X's. They're all important.
It's purely a timeline. It's a focus of timing and funding.
Great. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I agree with Councilor Clark to look at sale of assets as a potential revenue growth, albeit one-time dollars, but also not just growing the base, but finding creative and equitable ways through the revenue team's work to recommend establishing short and long-term stability. And that could very well be in the form of a consumption fee, roads fees, et cetera. I don't think anything is off the table when it comes to getting creative to expand the pie. Expanding an urban renewal district or creating a third urban renewal district that encompasses 6th and 7th or possibly goes out Highway 99. There are counselors here who've long talked about an events center, or rather a Mayor, I might need a second round, please.
Okay. All right, got it. Okay, Emily.
Thank you. This is an important list. It's really hard. I think our most important thing that we didn't know about when we first started about finding revenue for climate and homelessness was the gap. Yep. We've already cut things. The idea that we have to cut another $10 million of services, people aren't going to like that. You know, they already want to know, why haven't you done this? Why can't you do my great idea? And I'm like, it's a great idea. What are you willing to give up? The pool, the fire station, because that's what it's going to mean. So to me, all of these other things could be included in general fund expenditures. So we've got to get that general fund back together. After that, homelessness being the cry everywhere. I really want to keep, well, the rest stops are very dear to me, but the safe sleep sites, we've put our ARPA money there. What kind of investment is that if we can't keep it open? So we continue to have an increasing homelessness crisis. I think that is very important. It's a lot of money, but it's keeping people off the street. The navigation center, I also think, is really important. And those are my top 4, even though just today, this afternoon, I had a complaint from somebody who's really concerned about animal abuse. So I want to fund that too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have 4 counselors wanting a second round. So I have, oh, you have another first. Are you ready? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss you? I missed you, Randy. Go for it.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're in the second round queue.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I was glad to see Station 17 on there, but there's really 2 parts of that. One's the capital side of constructing the station. The other is the operational side of staffing it. I was surprised that we didn't see fire governance model, because that can, depending which way we go on that, there could be a cost or there could be a shedding of a liability if we were to offshore that. I also want to lend my voice as I frequently bring up about growing our base. And I agree with the counselors that have spoken to that. I know Counselor Evans and I have worked hard in West Eugene to attract manufacturing, and we've actually had people who are interested, businesses, companies that are interested. There is no land. So I think we kind of need to keep working on shovel-ready sites while we also start looking at how do we get cranes in the air in our downtown. That will also help with our housing shortage and our tax base. And then the other issue, I do want to bring up the multi-use stadium, and it gets tacked to the Emeralds a lot, but the reality is it's much more than that. It's something that will really help this community on a number of fronts. It's one-time money that the county is looking for some help with. It can be stretched, the payments over 10, 12 years. So it really reduces that liability per annum. But my big concern is we're going to be going on break pretty soon. There are decisions that need to be made. I still don't think we've had really any discussion about that yet. And I'm kind of interested to know what is the plan for bringing this to the point where we can actually talk about it and weigh in.
So the hope was that we would have had this initial conversation, when we first started, that you would start to like narrow in on the areas of interest and dollar amounts. Time has kind of gone by. You have a pretty full schedule. So my hope would be one of two things. And it could be both things, right? That between meetings that we're meeting with you individually to kind of understand where you're at with this list and what your level of comfort is with us just moving forward. And we can either bring back a final, like, here's what feels like is a good mix of things. Or you can say, you know what, all of these things are actually really important. Just move forward and start doing the work.
Some money.
And,
I think we have both of those
Yeah.
and both going on. I'm going to need a second round here, Mayor, but okay, I'll just wait for my second round.
Okay, Jennifer.
Thanks, Mayor. So you probably know your capacity, but better than we do. Obviously, all these things are important, but I'm going to agree with Emily. Like we need to stabilize our budget. Our community deserves certain level of services across the board and all the things we do. And when we can't provide that, then that is a serious problem. And I am not in favor of doing other non-essential things until those things that we need to provide for our community are being provided. So if we can't provide basic police and fire and keep our, our library open and functioning, and our safe sleep centers, there are things we have to do and we're not getting it done, and they're in jeopardy of getting worse. So that would be my first, if this round can't do everything, we need to fix that and then have those long-term discussions. I also agree with Mike. And maybe we can incorporate some of that in because some of those things might be getting at that long-term budget, but I would prefer to look at those first before we start to go out, and maybe that's the second round, and look for money for a stadium or for expanding into the 4th floor. Those are great and they would be wonderful for our community, but when we're not providing police service, that we need, those are luxuries at this point to me. So I would break this up so that we can get what we need to do done now and start moving forward with those, and then look at those other things. I don't know how realistic that is. And but that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. I've got Mike, Alan, Matt, Greg, and Randy. So take it away, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I would make the argument that there are very few things in our community in the way of services to people here that matter as much as the schools do. And it's not our job. Now, I would say we could spend millions trying to help the schools, and it would be money well spent on a very important set of services, very few of which, there could be very few more important things. But we don't do that. It's separate from us because it's not our job. And thank goodness we don't have to fund that as well in the position we're in. But I would also say that we're spending at least $7 million more each year right now than we did 2 years ago on the issue of homelessness and how we are responding. And I would say there's different ways to respond than we are. There's different entities that respond. I would make the argument that it's primarily the county's job. The county, because it is the health authority for our community, serves 30,000 people in Lane County as their primary health services provider. It's their job between the homelessness and poverty and homelessness board and human services that we also contribute money to. There were at least a third of the items on your list there, Sarah, that would be different things that we spend money on the issue of homelessness. I would make the argument that that's an area where it is more appropriate for us to look at how to work better with the county and spend less as a city on this. I know the mayor's argument that we're the emergency room, but I fundamentally disagree that the county should have that role. They should have the operation of the navigation center. They should have all of those, and we should be working better to support them.
Mike,
and not
you're at
take it on
time.
ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Alan, then Matt.
I'll just remind my good friend that we stepped into the breach because nobody was doing anything. I guess, you know, all of these are important, but I agree with Emily and Jennifer, we need to pick. And to me, and kind of back to where we were, the structural deficit is important. And the two that are screaming for funding are climate actions and homelessness. But by that, I always envisioned all these things 6, 7, 8, 10, 13. Those were all part of that. So, you know, if we were going to, you know, in my mind, I always had, like, you didn't have dollars up there on there, but $5 to $7 million for housing and homelessness, 5 to 7 for climate change. The other one that's important besides the structural deficit was the new fire station, but I don't know what that costs and how much it impacts the budget on an ongoing basis for operations. I think it's pretty significant to run a fire station. Probably is pretty significant to build one. And until we know more about what that looks like, where is it going to be, how much is it going to cost, it's kind of hard to plan around that unless you kind of you can throw it into the mix and say, you know, it's approximately, a lot of these are ranges, right? So we could say, you know, it's 5 to 10 million with 2 or 3 million operating costs, but I don't even know if that's even correct. But it's probably close. So that's where I would land. But I do think it is the council's decision on what to fund and eventually how to fund it. But I think it's, and that's a precursor to going off and discussing this. Just throwing this out and say, well, let's talk about this later, I think is inappropriate. That's just punting. It's that, you know, that's why we get paid the big bucks. It's a hard decision.
All right. All right. Matt, then Greg, Randy, and Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I actually like that they're teased out and not lumped together. And I want to empower the revenue team to look at all of the above, in addition to maintaining vital services. But, you know, there could be work within that revenue team to recommend to council expanding the dog licensing and cat licensing fees in the municipality, and that might help fill the gap. I think that there's no task too large or no task too small for the aforementioned revenue team to solve and make recommendations. I do wish the revenue team was an extension of this council, a public body, but that's not happening. And so I don't want to let that stop my support of the revenue team's work. I think there's a fundamental difference between legal obligations and our responsibility. I would concur that we have a responsibility right here in our own backyard to help and support our most vulnerable community members, though we may not have that legal obligation. That being said, I think that it would behoove the revenue team to have another column that indicates intergovernmental agency, like any sort of collaboration or what other agencies are bringing to the table. If it is not necessarily our lane, but we're committed to do the work, Human Services comes to mind. What's the county's obligation or what's their buy-in in regards to an application center? I see ours is bookmarked or earmarked at 1 million. I think that a revenue team could benefit greatly from a third column or fourth column, excuse me.
Okay, thanks. Greg, then Randy and Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. One of the things, and I don't know how much discussion you've had about this, is affecting us currently, will affect us over the next couple of years, is the runaway inflation we're experiencing right now. And what we are doing to address that. I read an article online a few days ago about the track and field community now saying, a lot of them are saying they can't afford to come to Eugene. And they're looking at other places like Miami and Indianapolis to hold events because it's cheaper to get there. The expense of coming to Eugene, flying into Eugene is going to make us an unattractive place for these events to be. And we have invested a lot of money in this infrastructure. Hayward Field, the riverfront, what we've invested in downtown and the hotels that have popped up over the years. If we can't put heads in beds and we can't accommodate the people that want to attend these events because of travel costs and other things, it's going to be hard for us to generate new revenue or continue to build on existing revenue sources vis-a-vis tourism. I'm really concerned about that because when I read that article, and I have to dig it up somewhere, I can't remember what it was. I get so much stuff coming in the email anyway, that yeah, it was quite shocking and disturbing to see that, the track and field community is now saying they don't have enough money to come here.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. All right. I have Randy and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. First, to address the fire station, the cost of the facility, the cost of the staffing depends on what's placed there. The location begs the question that probably should eventually be a multi-company station with an engine ladder truck. That's where a lot of the high rises are being built these days, but it doesn't have to start off that way. But I would suggest, without hearing Chief Caven here to speak to it, that it should be built as a multi-company station, and maybe we stair step into how it's staffed. Well, you start with one company and then you add a second company years later. So, but you have to have the space to put them in. But anyway, so that's that piece. Going back to the stadium, I agree with most of what I heard here tonight in discussion. I agree that we need to prioritize, but there's an issue of timing here that I'm really worried about if we're going to have a chance to do something. And I also know it's easier to find money for one-time problems than it is ongoing. And so with that in mind, I still think we need to at least have a look at that and be able to somehow have some options in front of us, whether it's selling some property that we have that's surplus or whatever it is that could help with that piece. Maybe the number's not 15 million. I don't know. I think there needs to be some more fleshing out of what the numbers do look like. But that's a resource that can be used in times of emergencies for a place to put people. You can fit a lot of temporary structures on the field if we need to. That's been done. I know in San Diego during wildfires. There's a lot of things that they can do. And if it's done right, it can also help with economic development, especially if we were able to work with the county and have a live, build, play area around it that would increase our tax base. That's another thing that's a possibility, and maybe move the fairgrounds out of town. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Make one quick comment
Please.
about that. So, one option is you say, yep, we're interested in revenue solutions for most or all of this. Some of them are more urgent than others. Go forth and do things. what I'm hearing you say is potentially pulling that off the list and saying, you can go work on this, but we actually want to talk about the M's separately and sooner. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what I'm
the
saying, but
will. I need to somebody needs to say separately and sooner, not for a revenue committee.
that's what I'm saying, because I don't think we can wait for a revenue committee. We may still be able to help with the multi-use facility, but we will lose the emeralds. They've got a time certain. So, I mean, if we're ready to do that, I'd just at least like to know what the possibilities are.
Okay, Emily.
Thank you. Following up on Randy's comments. What are these assets we could sell? I don't know what they are, so I don't know if I want to sell them. That's really important. I do see this as two topics, because if we're going to help the M's, we have to do it right away. When I first heard the ask, $15 million, and we have a budget shortfall, I'm like, yeah, I want a stadium, but there's no way. And I still kind of feel like there's no way. So I want to know what these assets are that we're not using that I don't know about. Then what I see as the real topic here tonight is we have all these things that we need to fund. I roughly added them up, and I think including our gap, it's $20 million a year. How much money are we getting from the CSI every year? Because that was the last revenue I worked on, and it was huge, and most things wouldn't touch it. So do we pick one thing and do a tiny tax, or do we say, to make this happen, we need 20 million a year?
Yes, and Counselor Simple, the CSI is bringing in about $21 million a year at the moment, and it will continue to grow.
Right. So that's great. We need to find another one of those that's not regressive.
Yeah.
Got it.
I like that conclusion. That's great. We need to find another one of those. Okay, I've got Mike and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quickly, I wanted to say that I didn't hear the first time, but I always want to put this out there because I think it's a good idea. One of the biggest problems in our community is bicycle theft. And one of the ways to solve that is to have them registered. And I believe it's also a revenue idea. The bicycle registration provides us an opportunity to fix both of those problems. So I hope when the revenue committee meets that they consider that option. Also want to say that if you considered an acre of bare land zoned for housing in Eugene, you might, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest you could probably sell that for $500,000. Full acre, maybe a smaller number, but that's a reasonable one, I think, based on what I know. But let's say, for example, the city owned 43 acres of bare land that's zoned for housing. That sounds like $20 million, which helps both with the M's and with our next year's gap. So just a thought that I'm throwing out there. If only we had 43 acres of bare land that is zoned for housing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greg again, and then Alan again, and then I think we're going to wrap it up.
Do we know how much this current inflationary spiral is contributing to our gap? What is the impact? Because every time I turn around, everything is going up.
Yes, everything is going up. I don't have an exact number for the general fund. We have assumptions in the forecast, and the out years of the forecast, I'll remind folks, we tie to the state economist, which is the state economist is still tying to the twos. So currently in this biennium, we have 2.9% this fiscal year and about 2.2 increase in the general fund and 2.4% in the second year. So as you know, inflation is coming down, but it's still lagging high in the 4%. So that's still an increased pressure overall, not only on the general fund, but all of our funds.
And second question is, as we are looking to expand the airport, I know that there's certain pressures right now on some of our private providers out there and, you know, other entities that are utilizing the airport. Do we have ways of getting additional revenue based on the amount of traffic that we are taking in at our airport?
To date, the airport is always sort of operated as an enterprise fund. So there's a lot of strings attached to FAA dollars and what we have to match. All of the income that we're generating there, some of it pays for central service allocation, like basic services that they rely on, payroll, HR, all of that. But all the rest of it goes right back in to the airport. And we're fundraising, I guess. It's probably not the right word, but looking at how we can actually expand Concourse C. So I wouldn't see that any fees raising at the airport would actually help the general fund. Unless you were, I just don't see how that would work.
Okay, I have Alan and Matt, and then we need to wrap it up because it's 7.
I think what Mike's talking about is the old Laurel Hill Golf Course, open space, selling that off for housing. I opposed that a long time, and that's not going to be quick, Mike. I'll let you know right up that I'll make sure it's not quick. So, and I'm not in favor of selling off parkland and open space to fund city services. But I am interested in the M's as a separate one-time thing that's separate from this. This seems to me ongoing stuff. That's a one-time thing. So I think it should be a separate process. And I don't know if you want to take a straw poll of that, but I think that's where most of the council is. But I do think we can't do all of this. We need to be more selective. And then finally, when I wrote the original work session on housing and homelessness and climate funding, I was thinking of filling the TAC report gap, which I know the TAC report's a little dated, but it still has a lot of validity to it in terms of things we need to do in order to get homelessness under control. And so that was in the $5 to $7 million range to figure that out. And most of these things that are listed here are in that. So that's what I was thinking about when that was there. So is that what you were thinking too? Okay.
I mean, that's how I remembered it. And I do think a lot of the things that are yellow are things we've stepped forward on, or we've moved forward on a lot of things, but a lot of that has happened on one-time dollars. So that still brings the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Matt?
Thank you. Mayor, I strongly support the sooner with the sense of urgency exploration around the emeralds. I don't necessarily I think separate them is good, but I wouldn't want to remove them from the long-term conversation. That's where my head's at. I think you could do both. Anyone who's listening to this who may find themselves on a revenue committee, I strongly urge exploration of a Ticketmaster style surcharge for every ticket sold in the municipality, every concert, every sporting event, every live performance that can be ongoing, provide ongoing stable funding. And then finally, well, I can't even read my own writing there. Oh, speaking to my earlier observation, Mayor, about obligation versus responsibility. I think that we have a responsibility to be community partners with both private and public partners to help save a storied institution as the Emeralds. Full disclosure, I hope it's not a conflict of interest, but I'll mention it. I do provide guest announcing services for the Emeralds, public address. So I not often, but I'll occasionally get the call to the bullpen to come and announce M's games. But even if I wasn't intimately involved in the organization, as a resident and as a counselor, I would be clamoring, champing at the bit for every creative way that we as a municipality can step up to the plate and do our part to help save such a storied institution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm hoping you got what you needed.
We're good. If you could just let me make one announcement
Yes.
after you gavel out.
Yep. Okay. So with that, I think we're past time. I appreciate the conversation. I'm going to close the work session and then one more comment from the manager.
Thank you. Oh, it was me.